City has been evacuated.
Explosive devices sent to CNN and high-ranking Democratic leaders.
But from the street corner of New York City. And they continued reporting media outlets quick to point the finger at President Trump.
The fake news is, in fact, the enemy of the people.
Hello, I'm Richard GIZBERT, and you're at The Listening Post. This coming Tuesday, November 6th, Americans will be voting in midterm elections which will be seen as a referendum on the Trump presidency. So it's fitting that one of the major issues before voters is the institution President Trump cannot stop talking about, the news media. Consider the stories monopolizing the U.S. airwaves recently. The coverage of that migrant caravan from Central America, the pipe bomb sent to CNN, amongst others, and the president's incessant tweets, all developments with significant media aspects to them. This week, we're breaking format, focusing on the U.S. In the second half of the program, we examine a Christian broadcasting network that somehow backs a president who is nobody's idea of a saint. We'll also talk to Jay Rosen, an academic who's been studying the U.S. media for more than 30 years, one of the most authoritative media critics out there. We'll discuss Donald Trump's attacks on the mainstream media, why it is that they work, how CNN became a hate object, and the larger crisis of credibility that American journalism faces today. But first, a look at some of the stories that have made headlines and produced sound bites as Election Day approaches.
Latest now on that migrant caravan.
A caravan of migrants is now about...
With the midterm elections approaching, the political stakes rising, the new lows just keep on coming. A caravan of migrants en route from Honduras in search of a better life. But on right-wing outlets like Fox News, it was something more sinister, a looming invasion.
So to restate, the caravan is in fact heavily male and highly dangerous.
And the president went even further.
They say it happens all the time from the Middle East. It's not even saying bad or good, but some real bad ones. But they intercept, well, they could very well be. But there's no proof. There's no proof of anything. There's no proof of anything.
The alleged shooter in the deadly attack on Pittsburgh synagogue.
Last weekend in Pittsburgh, a gunman opened fire inside a synagogue, killing 11 worshipers. His social media movements were traced to Gab, a platform popular with the alt-right that features a particularly nasty brand of anti-Semitism.
CNN Bureau.
And there were the pipe bombs mailed to various Trump critics, including the channel that is his bête noire, the one he loves to hate, CNN. All of the perpetrators were Trump supporters. However, the president accepted none of the blame for his rhetoric, let alone their actions, putting it instead on the media to set a more civil tone.
And to stop the endless hostility and constant negative and oftentimes false attacks and stories.
Accusing CNN and the opposition Democratic Party of exploiting the attacks ahead of voting day, while Trump's supporters, like Lou Dobbs, who hosts a show on Fox Business, suggested the bomb scares, including the ones against his journalistic colleagues at CNN, had been fabricated.
As the president doubles and triples and quadruples down.
America's media ecosystem now resembles a battlefield.
There is an invasion from south of our border.
Words are the weapons.
What are you going to shoot him, Sean? What are you going to shoot him?
Conspiracies and hyperbole are the currency.
Somebody's gonna get hurt or worse at that border.
And the false flags are flying high.
Jay Rosen, thanks for joining us at The Listening Post today. Why don't we start with this question? How has Donald Trump, 2 years into his presidency, turned the media into such a useful enemy, perhaps the most useful political enemy of them all?
Well, let's start with some basic facts about Donald Trump as president of the United States. One is he doesn't know anything about the issues that he must deal with. He isn't good at the job. Nothing he says can be trusted. And when you have a president like that, what's going to happen is he generates a lot of bad news for himself. And he has managed to convince his supporters that this happens because the news media hates him.
As the far left media once again use tragedy to sow anger and division.
And he's gone one step further to say to them, when they criticize me, it's because they hate you. And so he's not only turned the press into a hate object, but he's made it the foundation of his support.
When Trump was elected, you used a seasonal metaphor to describe political journalism in the U.S. You talked about the establishment media having entered winter. What did you mean by that? How did political journalism fail its public? Describe the disconnect.
Well, I meant, first of all, that about a third of the country had exited from the press system, meaning that they mistrust the product on principle. Trump presented unique challenges to the press, and our press corps is not very good at rethinking its routines on the fly. So, for example, the spectacular fall down in the run-up to the Iraq War, as well as the failure to alert the country about the financial crisis in 2008, weren't followed by any deep reflection, reform. And we saw the same thing after the 2016 election. And instead of trying to fix what had gone wrong in political journalism, our press corps simply moved on to the next story, which in this case was a very big story, Donald Trump as president.
On the recent migrant caravan story, Fox News has plenty to answer for, but there were some other news organizations that also bought into the narrative that Trump and the Republicans were trying to push. To what extent do you think news outlets from the center, even from the left or near left, are also giving this particular story outsized attention, once again allowing Trump to be the media's assignment editor, or can they just not help themselves?
It's just, very difficult for TV producers to resist that. Even something as simple as showing us on the map where those people were and how close, in fact, they were to the U.S. border, which at one time was like 1,000 miles away or hundreds of miles away. Even something as simple as that was too difficult for cable news producers. So that was a case where Trump and his propaganda outmaneuvered TV news and simply capitalized on some of its weaknesses.
There's this ongoing battle between President Trump and CNN. Trump screams fake news. CNN responds with a robust defense of its journalism. For those of us on the outside, this would seem to be an easy argument for CNN to win. It seems like a slam dunk. Why hasn't that been the case?
Well, I think what you have to understand here is that for this portion of the public, Trump is the major source of news about Trump, which is to say that for that part of the country, an authoritarian news system is already up and running. And in that sense, nothing CNN could say would make a bit of difference to the core of Trump's supporters, who have now assimilated CNN as a symbol of everything they hate. It's a symbol of cultural elites, of the people who are in control of the system. And the paranoid style of politics that Trump practices and the conspiracy thinking that it often produces are all bound up with this mistrust of CNN.
You recently returned to New York after spending 4 months in Germany. You wrote extensively about the media there. You offered some criticisms, but you had mostly positive things to say. Is it possible to boil down what it is about the culture of journalism in Germany, the way it's structured, the way it's regulated, that exposes areas where the U.S. media are failing and perhaps regulators have failed as well?
Well, one of the first things that struck me in Germany was no Fox News. There's just nothing like that in the German system. The way that a story can go from the fever swamps of the extreme right wing to the White House in 24 hours, that just doesn't exist in Germany. Part of the reason it doesn't exist is that the public broadcasters occupy such a large cultural space. It's very professional, and it's a huge part of the media system. But that's not the only thing. There's a culture in German journalism that makes it pretty explicit that both public broadcasters and the profession of journalism exist to defend German democracy and to prevent extremes of left or right from overtaking the public sphere. We don't have anything like that in the United States.
The existence of a state broadcaster in Germany and countries like the UK and right across Europe is significant. But what about the rules of the game? Fox News was created only 3 years after the Fairness Doctrine was scrapped. That was the U.S. regulatory requirement that compelled broadcast news organizations, no matter what story they were covering, to show both sides of that story. How, in your view, has the end of that particular requirement, which still exists in countries like the UK and Germany, changed things?
Well, I'm not sure why the Fairness Doctrine gets the attention it does on this issue. I don't think it would have had much of an effect in preventing the rise of Fox News. And there's nothing really in the Fairness Doctrine, especially with the weakening of the federal government as a regulator of everything, not just that occurred in the 80s and 90s, that would have stopped, I think, the growth of Fox News or the growth of conservative talk radio. It's not just that countries like Germany and the UK have some sort of fairness or impartiality requirement. That is part of it. But the thing that really makes a difference is that they have a dedicated finance system that makes those organizations strong. We have nothing like that. There are countries in Europe that spend $100 per citizen a year on public broadcasting. We spend like $5.
Well, you may not think that the end of the Fairness Doctrine had anything to do with the start of Fox News. Rupert Murdoch, who owns the channel, would beg to disagree. When he was asked why it is that he hadn't turned his British news channel, Sky News, into a Fox News, he said because the regulations don't allow it. Now, I get that the Fairness Doctrine may not have been the perfect regulatory measure, but it was written in 1949. It was 40 years old when it was dispensed with by the Reagan administration. In most countries, when they have a regulation that isn't doing the job, they rewrite it, they update it. So why this approach?
Well, because we don't have a Congress that works at all. We don't have a regulatory regime that works for hardly anything. And a third difference that you didn't mention is that the First Amendment in the United States is much stronger than the equivalents in Germany and the UK. So, for example, in Germany, it is against the law to practice Holocaust denial. You aren't allowed to make particular ethnic groups into hate objects. And so there are rules that we would never tolerate in the United States and our understanding of the First Amendment.
Final question. In one of those pieces that you posted back in 2016 after Trump won his election, you made all kinds of observations about the American media. You issued a few warnings. You offered a few bromides. But I went through the comments under that piece, and one reader left one saying, good luck getting the genie back in the bottle. Does he have a point? Can what ails the American media be fixed?
Yeah, he had a point. I think we're in a cycle where it's not obvious how we change it except through political change. The fusing of the media system and the political system has proceeded to such a degree that it's very hard to imagine how, just by changing practices, our press changes its status. I mean, after all, Fox News and the White House are, in a way, the same operation right now. So I think this cycle that we're in is going to have to run its course somehow. It's going to either have to burn out or meet with massive political change before we see any real change in the dynamic between the press and the president.
Okay, Jay Rosen, thanks again for talking to us here at the Listening Post today.
Thank you for having me.
There are a select few broadcasting networks in President Trump's good books. Fox News is one of them, but the president also has time for the Christian Broadcasting Network, CBN. Over the past 2 years, CBN has had exclusive interviews with Donald Trump, as well as many of his officials and advisors. This is a relationship built on joint interests. Evangelicals, especially white evangelicals, are a big part of the Republican Party's core vote. And heading into midterm elections, they're among Trump's most stubborn supporters. He needs to keep them on side. CBN provides the perfect go-between. And CBN's executives have a religious vision for the United States that depends on a president willing to champion their beliefs, even if he himself is not exactly pious. The Listening Post's Flo Phillips now on Donald Trump and CBN, a political match made in heaven.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming out to our first official briefing here in the Brady Room.
January 23rd, 2017, the first White House press conference of the Trump administration. Question number 1 goes to
Daniel Halper, New York Post.
The second question,
Jennifer Wishon.
who? Where? Jennifer Wishon, not a name from CNN or CBS. She's CBN, the Christian Broadcasting Network.
We were watching that first press conference in the newsroom here. There's a cheer that went up when he called on the CBN correspondent.
So, Jenny, what was that like? You're in the briefing room, and oh, by the way, sorry, Associated Press, Jenny from the B Block has a question. How did that go?
Well, it's remarkable, David.
That was a signature moment for us because we never get called on. We've been in that White House room for, first time was 1980, so it's been a while.
It legitimates CBN as a news outlet. It recognizes them, and it does something else too. Trump is basically saying, I see you. None of those other people sees you. I'm going to overturn the system that says I have to call on CNN, I have to call on CBS, I have to call on the New York Times. No, I'm going to call on CBN because we're part of this anti-establishment radicals overthrowing the system.
Compared to giants like CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News, CBN's news division is small scale, but it plays a very specific, strategic role, shaping the political interests and voting behavior of many evangelical Americans. The network's stated mission is to prepare the United States of America for the coming of Jesus Christ. Its method, the strategic use of mass communication, a global ministry relying on TV, internet, and social media to spread good news. According to the network's CEO, CBN's flagship show, The 700 Club, gets roughly 500,000 to 600,000 US viewers a day. Not exactly the more than 3 million viewers Sean Hannity gets every night on Fox News. But that content is then translated and transmitted around the globe, hitting a monthly reach of up to 15 million.
CBN is the most influential evangelical Christian organization in the world, without a doubt. It's not so due to the size of their audience, though. It's due to the fact that all of the other leaders in white evangelical Christianity pay attention to what Pat says. And so it's a matter of not only influencing masses, but it's of influencing the influencers. And that's what CBN does so well.
Terry Heaton was the executive producer of the 700 Club for much of the 1980s. The Pat he's talking about is Pat Robertson. Robertson is central to the CBN story. He founded the network in 1960, and at age 88, still hosts the 700 Club.
In Jesus' name!
He's a hugely influential figure in the evangelical community, with a fundamentalist view of Christianity. But it's not just his faith that guides him. His father was a US senator, and he himself ran for the Republican presidential nomination in 1988.
So Pat's got politics flowing through his blood, and I've always said that he is first a politician and secondly a minister. I think he's brilliant. He really is. He's especially brilliant when it comes to politics and marketing.
You could think of him almost as a precursor to Trump, a TV personality running for president, right? He laid the groundwork for someone who's not necessarily a political person running for president and using the mobilization of conservative Christian voters as the driving force behind their presidential run.
Pat Robertson believes in the end times, and he believes that before the second coming of Christ can happen, there has to be a kind of apocalypse. And so a politics of chaos actually fits in very nicely with his religious beliefs.
And that's going to be a great thing for Christianity, believe me.
So to the extent that Donald Trump is an agent of chaos, Pat Robertson embraces that.
I want you to know there are thousands and thousands of people praying for you.
Because he sees this as getting us closer and closer to the end times and the second coming.
Evangelicals were central to Trump's election victory in 2016. More than 8 in 10 voted for him. More than 6 in 10 still think he's got the country headed in the right direction. And as the country gears up for the midterms, Trump needs to keep conservative Christians on side. CBN's influence and reach provides the perfect platform for that.
Trump and CBN have developed a relationship over the years, long before most people thought he was running for president. He did an interview with CBN, with David Brody, that seemed like perhaps he was thinking about it in 2011.
You have to pick somebody that's going to win.
I think he's interviewed Trump at least a dozen times, one-on-one.
Who is God to you? What are some of your thoughts on this?
So that has enabled CBN to position itself as the inside baseball network.
God is the ultimate. I mean, God created this.
The tight relationship between a seemingly ungodly president and his evangelical base appears in Congress. Donald Trump doesn't exhibit the traditional Christian principles that the CBN promotes. So I've come here to the network's headquarters in Virginia Beach to ask the CEO if this is just an alliance of political convenience. Trump doesn't come across as the most devout president that there's ever been, and
he's not devout.
And you are the most outwardly Christian broadcaster in the country, and yet you still support him.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
I think I joined with a lot of people waking up the day after the election going, what just happened? He's an unlikely president, and it's unlikely for him to be of such appeal to evangelical voters. That said, I think President Trump is an absolute master of media, master of promotion, and as a master politician, he made very specific promises to the evangelical community about Supreme Court justices, about the Johnson Amendment, about Christian persecution.
Christianity, it's under siege.
Unlike other politicians who make promises in the campaign and then do something different in office, he's fulfilled his promises. He's come through.
A lot of what white evangelicals have had to do since Trump appeared on the scene is to figure out kind of how he fits in their theology and in their religious commitments.
The office is so powerful that you need God even more.
A CBN interview says Donald Trump cares about you.
Nobody's done more for Christians or evangelicals or frankly religion than I have.
He's going to sit down and talk to us, even though he won't talk to the Washington Post or the New York Times or to CBS. So Donald Trump values you. You will continue to believe in Donald Trump because Trump believes in you.
Trump may value CBN, and CBN may value the access it gets. But that doesn't mean there's any value in the news it's producing. And that's coming from someone who should know.
10 years before Fox News came on the scene, we wrote the playbook for conservative news. We called it TV news with a different spirit. And all it was an attempt to insert conservative propaganda into the news.
I am convinced this is a nation under God.
In the end, right-wing news is only propaganda. It's not news. There's no attempt to be unbiased. And I think it's gone so far now that the public isn't aware of that, but that's still what we created.
Blame me. I'm the one who is saying, I don't want to play gotcha journalism. I think there's plenty of place in the news space today where you're going to hear that other side. What is missing, I think, in the landscape is, well, what is it that they're really trying to say? What is that unedited version?
Last month, that unedited version came from Pat Robertson.
Welcome.
Just days after the killing of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi, he was on the air, not reminding his evangelical viewers of God's commandment, thou shalt not kill, or defending a fellow journalist, He was echoing the president.
But you don't blow up an international alliance over one person. I mean,
Robertson has since changed his rhetoric, right after the president changed his.
because the Saudis aren't telling the truth. I mean, they've lied and lied and lied. We certainly can't allow this man to go scot-free. He's a murderer.
He was reaffirming that for CBN, it's about political relationships, and one relationship in particular.
That's our special edition on the American broadcast media on the eve of the midterms. So many channels, so many voices, consumers spoiled for choice but lacking in trust, a distinct lack of regulations, and a vital institution left abandoned to the corporate sector to do with journalism, information, and truth what they will. As the late CBS anchor Walter Cronkite used to say when he signed off each weeknight, that's the way it is. We'll see you next time here at the Listening Post.